Welcome to New Release Review, part of the Movie Friends podcast. My name is Seth. Today we're talking about Furiosa, a Mad Max saga from 2024, directed by George Miller. We will be discussing spoilers throughout this entire episode, so if you have not seen Furiosa, which, quite frankly, what are you doing? Come on, it's Memorial Day weekend. You have time. You sat around watching TikTok. Go see Furiosa. But anyway, if you haven't seen it yet, pause this, go watch the film, and then come back and listen. My guest for today is Brandon Wilson. He's an LA-based teacher and filmmaker and occasional film writer, and I'm pretty excited to have him on to talk about Furiosa. Brandon, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much, Seth, for having me on.
Hey, thank you for coming. So I noticed that you went to see this with your whole family.
Correct.
So you have a pretty big spread of ages and
Yes.
demographics in there. So how is the overall reception?
Pretty strong. I think everyone was happy. My 12-year-old quickly fell asleep somehow, but that was expected. We were a little late, and it's fine. He'll
Sure.
catch it later. He only just saw Fury Road maybe a year ago, so.
Nice.
But he was just happy to be out with us. But no, generally we were all pretty happy with the film. I think we all knew that this was going to be. We all sort of individually prepared ourselves that this could not be Fury Road.
Sure.
Fury Road is a once in a generation. Like, I don't even think that's hyperbolic. Kind of say once in a generation event. It's the kind of thing that has to come out of nowhere. You can't be expecting Fury Road and get another Fury Road. So my oldest son tends to be very he tends to find very how do I put it, like his critiques can get to be a little bit baroque and but he probably liked it the least of us in terms of so maybe he had some issues with world building, or I can't represent him, but yeah, no, we were all quite pleased. I mean, my bottom line, which I said to them and I repeated in my little letterboxed review, was that every minute you're in the hands of a master. And it's a very rare thing to not just experience, and you just know this person knows exactly what they're doing way beyond the average filmmaker. But also, we're watching a film by a guy who made the genre. Not since George Romero was making zombie films have we had that experience where it's like this guy. He didn't take this genre and kind of and do something interesting with it. He made it. This is his. And it's not to say that every film he makes in this secret series is perfect, but I mean, it means a lot, at least to me. So yeah, I was very impressed with it, and I am a Fury Road fanatic. I even read Kyle Buchanan's book about the making of Fury Road. Took me a long time I read it off and on for a long, long time, which somehow seems appropriate given how long it took to make Fury Road. But yeah, so I'm very versed in this world, and I've seen pretty much everything George Miller's done. I'm like a big Miller fan. During quarantine, one of the sort of the second wave of quarantine when it was not quite as strict, but we were still not going out as much. So we rewatched his entire filmography and sort of in order. And so, yeah, it's definitely something I was keenly, acutely ready to experience.
Nice. Yeah, for 5 films and to have only what I would consider one to be not as great, but then you have 2 that are some of the greatest action films ever made, maybe the best car movies ever made. And now, Furiosa, and I'm not quite sure where that fits in for me, but 5 films by the same director over decades. What is there really, to turn your nose up to about that,
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noted when you said your youngest watched Fury Road around, 11 or 10. 11 or 12. I can't imagine watching something that incredible. That would have melted my mind at that age. That's like, it's so awesome that a whole generation of film lovers will have Fury Road to kind of inspire them and help them love movies. It's just a shame that it's one of the pinnacles, and so where do you kind of go from there?
Yeah, like I literally don't know how. Yeah, I mean, where could you can't top it? Like, right? So it's like it must be for a lot of the younger generation. It must be for some of them a real call to arms. But it's like, yeah, you're not you're not going to top that. I mean, it's there's no room for to like, well, well, let me take this to the next level. Like, no,
Right.
it's at the it's at the it discovered a new level and hit that. And I teach, so I work with high schoolers and I work with college kids. And yeah, I think that every now and then, yeah, it definitely comes up when people, you and I, because I'm always asking people what their favorite films are. And
Sure.
the high school kids, maybe not so much. It's a whole generational shift, as we have people talk about with movies, just
Hmm.
aren't quite what they were. But for the college students who have sought out a class on, because I generally am teaching at a couple of institutions right now, sort of like the film 101 class. And so,
Oh, cool.
yeah, you definitely get that sort of, we'll hear about Fury Road from them. So yeah, it's almost 10 years old next year. So
Oh man.
yeah, it's definitely had an impact, on all of us.
So it's a shame that Furiosa, obviously it's a widening and a deepening of the Fury Road story. We have the same characters. And so I understand how it's very difficult to not directly compare the two films. But like you said, and like anyone who knows the story of Fury Road, I think it's unfair to compare the two. And so when I went into it, I was like, this movie was not made over the course of 30 years.
Right.
And I left it very pleased. I left Furiosa kind of buzzing. I
Yeah.
I tweeted at 1:10 in the morning as I sat in my car, unable to turn my car on. I was like, I'm just supposed to like drive home now?
Right.
Like I should have done what you did, which was see it with people so you can walk out and you're talking about it. I
Hmm.
was like, I walked out into a barren wasteland of of upstate New York, 1 a.m. and was completely by myself with my thoughts. And I was like, I this is so odd, just kind of re-entering, normal life. So
Yes.
I was thrilled by it. I was excited by it. I was very pleased with it, and I think it's unfair that so many new films when they come out, people expect them to be everything. Well, it wasn't that funny, or it wasn't
Hmm.
as exciting, or it didn't have a good message, or certainly we can appreciate when films tick a whole bunch of boxes for us, but I also think there's just something to be said for this movie was super cool and I had a good time. I had a
Hmm.
good time watching it. So I think it can kind of stand alone on its own. And yeah, maybe the only part of it is that since we know Furiosa is in the next movie, some of that tension is gone, but I don't care. That's okay.
Yeah.
So, how did you feel about Anya Taylor-Joy taking over the reins of Furiosa?
Well, passing that part on to someone is almost like in microcosm trying to make a follow up to Fury Road. It's like you have to just at the beginning go, well, what you just saw before can't be topped. So don't even
Hmm.
think of it that way. Just think of it as like an expansion perhaps, or something that's going to be alongside, like or sit alongside what you already saw that was great. Because yeah, Charlize, the whole thing about Furiosa, about Fury Road, is that the sly way in which Furios is introduced, like you think she's the second lead, and you realize it's really her story. Max is the
Hmm.
second lead in his own film, and
Hmm.
even though he's the first one you see, and that again, that's the kind of thing that you just can't reproduce, because now you're walking into a movie called Furiosa, so you know that this is the character. So Charlize was amazing and is a remarkable actress, and obviously there's nothing to add about her commitment to physical roles. But Taylor-Joy, who I've seen in things, but I've never had a very strong, I guess the menu, I started to take notice of her
Okay.
because, I saw The Witch, which I was a little like not super high on in general, but I think it was when I saw the menu that I really started to take notice of her as
Hmm.
being someone who's really interesting and making really strong choices. The voice, to me, Anya Taylor Joy, it's that voice. That's what sort of separates her from so much of her generation, is that she has this kind of a really remarkable voice that doesn't feel like she's doing a voice. Is just this is someone who's very in command of that instrument,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not dissimilar from Charlize Theron's voice. They're not doing these are not vocal fry, raising at the end of questions, or
Mm-hmm.
there's no sort of valley girl drift, none of that. This is just
Mm-hmm.
they're doing something very powerful with their voices, so you can just feel. And then of course for a lot of the film she can't speak, and those
Mm-hmm.
sort of like gigantic eyes of hers are totally equal to the challenge. I mean, this actress could have easily been a silent film star.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's incredibly impressive, and you can see, and when you hear her talk about what she put into the role and how much she put into the role. I mean, she's literally said to a couple of reporters, I'm not fully ready to talk about what happened to me making this
Wow.
film, places that she had to go, and what it pulled out of her. That does not, when you watch the film, you understand it's not hyperbole. It's like, no, this she's speaking for real.
Right. I give her a lot of credit. I mean, I'm sure she got paid a lot of money, and it's of course a great opportunity to star in a film. But I give her a lot of credit for willingly signing up to take over a incredibly iconic modern role like that. It's a big risk, because if you screw it up, you're falling now not just from, okay, we made this original movie and people didn't like it. Now you're automatically setting yourself up to be compared to Charlize, who is
Yeah.
I mean, she's incredible. She's amazing, in everything
Hmm.
that she does. So before the film came out, I, I can't stand when people go through a film and they're like, there's 27 curse words, and this person has, X amount of lines of dialogue. I'm like, okay, that means nothing. That means
Right.
nothing for the experience of a film. Like, I don't care how long Anthony Hopkins is on screen as Hannibal Lecter. When you watch the film and you feel it and you experience, I mean, yes, those are fun little facts, right? And
Right.
as film lovers, we like to know those fun little facts, but it's only fun because, like for Hopkins, his presence is felt so greatly throughout that film that when you hear it, it's kind of shocking and surprising. And
Hmm.
so before this film came out, they calculated the amount of lines that she has, but they didn't take into account that Furiosa is played as a child for a good portion of the film. They don't put into account that she can't talk. One, because she's pretending to be a war boy,
Yeah.
and then two, because George Miller doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue throughout the Mad Max films.
Yeah.
And I feel like I wouldn't have even noticed, honestly, the
Yeah.
amount of time that people are speaking. She's good. I liked her in this. I first saw her in The Witch. We went to see that in theaters, and we were like completely blown away. I loved that movie. It's probably I don't want to say it's like an inaccessible film, but if you're not super brushed up on puritanical Christian history and like watching it with subtitles, I feel like so much of the film it sounds like they're speaking another language the whole time. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And yeah, rewatching it at home with subtitles, I was like, oh, that's what they were saying, and that's, oh, great. But just loved her in that, and I've been a little, I don't want to say frustrated with her career since then, but I feel like she's underutilized in what she can do. She's doing a lot of like kind of steely, reserved, similar to what she did in The Menu or like Last Night in Soho. I think maybe it's her eyes. Maybe directors want to use, her eyes to tell what her character is thinking and doing, but I think that she can do a lot more, and I was very happy to see her in this very action heavy role. um and I thought that she did really, really well, so hopefully people start to branch out with her a little bit more. I haven't seen The Queen's Gambit. Have you seen that?
No, I have not either. So it's hard to say. But yeah, that was obviously huge for her.
Yeah.
You just think about how little is called upon young actors. I mean, so much
Mm-hmm.
is being said on Twitter right now about the sort of disastrous last 15 years, in terms of Hollywood cultivating the next generation of movie star. And
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood has never been good about that kind of thing. Hollywood has always had this attitude of like, you know, if they're good, they'll show up.
Mm.
But it was really pronounced behind the camera. Hollywood's never been good about cultivating talent behind the camera. They just figure like Dementis, they just figure the most vicious will show up, and they don't have to go out and actually cultivate or find people or train people. And now it's even true of on-screen talent, I believe. Now, there's just complete lack of any vision beyond how do we make $1 billion this quarter. That's it. That's
Yeah.
all that it's
Yeah.
there. There's no sense of like, okay, we got to look at these 20 somethings and we got to start building the next Tom Hanks. We got to start
Yeah.
building the next, and really bring this person along. It's, though of course those people are out there. Anya Taylor-Joy certainly is going to be a movie star. Someone like Jack Quaid is almost inevitably going to be a major star. But it's just amazing how little they get offered and how little the industry has for them, because the industry really has just come down to one kind of movie and one kind of experience, and it's they're starting to reap what they've sown, with
Mm-hmm.
the audience kind of tuning out. That's a whole nother conversation in many ways. About the I think it was Darren Mooney on Twitter. I will never call it X, never. Darren
I
Mooney on
agree.
Twitter, like doing an extended metaphor about agriculture and about how, yeah, this is like bad agriculture where you overuse the soil, the land that you have, and you don't plan for the future, and now you're getting nothing. Nothing's coming. No returns. I mean, that's
Yeah.
it's just the incredible short-sightedness of it that isn't even really capitalistic. Like this is just again, it just the only concern is to have each quarter, the moment that you're in, deliver, and not at all thinking about 4 or 5 quarters from now. That's just
Right.
yeah, anyhow.
Yeah, it's like how many CEOs can we switch in and out at Disney? Each plan that's unveiled, it's like, how long can we bang our head against the wall doing the same thing over and over and over again before? So yeah, it unfortunately appears that we still in 100 years haven't drifted too far away from a few very powerful men being able to make the decisions for everybody. And unfortunately, the idea of the $1 billion movie, I personally am totally fine with moving away from that. Spending $400 million to $200 million on every movie, it's just not realistic. You look at Moonlight, which was made for a few $1 million and goes
Yeah,
on to win Best Picture. You could make 100 movies for the cost of one of these, and you would employ people. Every script on the blacklist would get made. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're putting all of our eggs into these huge baskets, and for Furiosa, people are just beside themselves right now because it, quote unquote, only made $31 million in its opening weekend off of 100 I can't remember, 150, around that area.
Sounds right.
But when you look at the other big tentpole action movies that are coming out, 100 and less than 200 million for this movie, that's a fairly conservative number based on what had been being spent over the last few years,
Mm-hmm.
So it's a shame that, this great art form is so closely linked with, the financial part of it, and that the financial part is 99% of the time what's guiding the ship.
Yeah, absolutely. I just picked up my phone and looked it up. So, according to going to Wikipedia, this costs 168 million or so, which is about right. And Fury Road, there's a range there. It doesn't have an exact dollar sign because I think with the length of time that was spent,
Yeah.
but it probably cost about as much, Fury Road. And
Okay.
it should be said that Fury Road only made $380 million. Like
Right.
that's fine, but that's not really a big hit. And that's another part of this whole conversation about the reception. The film's opening weekend is that no Mad Max film has ever been,
Sure.
huge. It's not Star Wars, It's like these movies have never had that kind of wide appeal. I'm not going to look up every film, but I don't recall. I'm old enough to have seen Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome in the theaters when I was a teenager, and it did okay, but I don't think it was by any stretch a huge hit. There was, Tina Turner lent a certain amount of cred to it, but yeah, so
Yeah.
these films have never been those kind of moneymakers. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a little sort of out of context to try to talk about it in that conversation. But anyway, we don't have to keep
Yeah.
talking about.
The
There's
first
so much to
one.
say about the film. I don't want to get bogged down in like
Right.
box
The
office.
the first one for a while was the most successful independent film ever made, but not because of how much money it made, but because of how little it cost to make it.
Right. Right.
So yeah. I want to ask you about Chris Hemsworth
Yeah.
as Dementis. What did you think?
Again, you really walk out of Furiosa. You really walk out thinking about how little we call upon actors in the
Mm.
sort of Marvel age to do. Um, Now, of course, I like the Thor movies. Well, I love a couple of the Thor movies, and I hate a couple of the others. But um, but I've enjoyed his presence in this role as
Mm.
Thor, and I think he's great. But like, at the end of the day, it's Thor, and it's only gonna, there's only so much that he's gonna be called to do, and then he's doing, these forgettable Netflix films or what have you. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
we just don't offer actors. We don't know what these actors are capable of, what they've got inside of them. Now, I know for some people, Dementis is maybe too much, but I mean, it's like saying something's too much in a George Miller film is kind of like, I don't know. It's, I mean, it's like complaining about water being wet. I don't know. It's just
Right.
like
Yeah.
excess maximalism is like the point. But, yeah, to see him sort of take on this part, because again, like all of us, I think when I heard he was in it, I just assumed he was going to be a Morton Joe, some
Yeah.
young version of that character, back before he needed the breathing apparatus. And of course, George Miller is always a step ahead of us, and no, he's someone else, this sort of alternative, a rival to that, another warlord who's completely the opposite of a Morton Joe. And yeah, I mean, obviously Hemsworth has a gift for comedy. And it's one of those great parts where someone's movie star charisma is being used in the service of a truly repellent character,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and that's always an interesting thing to experience as an audience member. Like you can't help but be sort of drawn to him, even with the fake nose and the fake teeth, and as this, this is he cuts a very impressive figure, but yeah, at the same time, he's a horrible guy, just really pretty repugnant. And yeah, it's like this combination of like Heath Ledger's Joker. That really kind of stood out to me, especially towards in his like last big scene when he's being confronted and beaten by Furiosa, and talks about how his high tolerance for pain, that he's basically not going to give her what she wants out of this. But but I don't think that it's a caricature. I think you can see that this, with these kind of movies, you're always sort of what's interesting about them is imagining these characters in this world, and how Walking Dead sort of addressed this too, like how the post-apocalyptic era, who's going to rise in that world, that in this world is just, who among us right now walking around would be a Dementus if everything collapsed. So yeah, you find yourself thinking about that as well. And then yeah, so yeah, a little bit of Heath Ledger's Joker. I mean, a little, and something like Shakespeare's Falstaff. You think about a character like that who who has a sort of grandness and a scale to them that somehow, yeah, is just totally believe it's not too much somehow. You still feel like this is a huge character in many ways, but like there's a there's something very human and believable about them at the same time.
Absolutely. It was an interesting idea. And like you already mentioned right at the beginning, George Miller is a master, right? I didn't care for was it 10,000 years of
Three
longing?
thousand years of longing,
Yeah.
yeah.
I, I didn't care for that film, but at the same time, I didn't think, oh, this is an amateur piece of
Yeah,
crap
yeah,
film. You know what I mean? And some of the sequences in that, when we're telling the stories, not just in the hotel room, I was like, oh, this is some amazing stuff. Like
yeah,
really, really great storytelling and world building, and we get a little bit of that excess idea, right?
yeah,
It was interesting of him to not betray the character of Furiosa that we already know, but to introduce Dementis as, like you said, bad dude. When we meet him, he's making someone else's followers pull their leader apart with motorbikes. And the only way to get onto the motorbike is to kill your other followers. That's a similar idea that we've seen a few other places, right, in media before, but pretty rough, pretty
yeah,
pretty crazy introduction to this guy. But then, and I think this is very much to the writing's credit and to Hemsworth's credit, throughout the movie you are somewhat endeared to him, and I think it's because of Hemsworth's comedic abilities. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so with Immortan Joe, with the People Eater, with the Bullet Lord, I don't
yeah,
remember all of their names,
yeah.
but you don't have, at no point with any of those characters are you kind of like laughing with them.
Right,
And so he doesn't go back and be like, okay, well, now here's Immortan Joe, but in his younger days, and he was cool, and
right,
here's how he got the breathing apparatus, which is a story that you or I or most people would probably tell. And I think
right,
it's like you said, the one that we assumed that we were going to be getting, right? Like,
right,
it's interesting that you brought up Heath Ledger's Joker, because Nolan does the same thing throughout that film, which is, let me tell you how I got these scars. And we never get that cutesy or interesting, winky kind of setup to the story. We're dropped back in, and it's like, there's a Morton Joe. Guess what? He's always been a Morton Joe. But
right.
here's this new character who can inhabit comedy in a way that a Morton Joe can't, Furiosa can't. Like you said, it's just he's another guy. He's another warlord, and it makes this version of the Mad Max world more interesting, more full, because it's not just a copycat of Morton Joe. Like when Dementis and Immortan are like staring each other down, it doesn't feel like, when you play Street Fighter and you select the same character with Y instead of A.
Uh-huh.
And it's just, the alternate color, but they do the same exact moves.
Right.
No, Dementis is doing his own moves. He's got his own,
Yeah.
and he is chaos to these different towns that have agreements and shipments and schedules. And you add in that kind of madness to the situation. And like suddenly I'm like, oh no, what's a Morton Joe gonna do?
Right.
Like where before I don't care about this guy. I want to see him thrown off the Citadel. I really liked him. I thought that he was really well acted, really well written, and kind of like how you were saying in Fury Road, we kind of sneak in Furiosa as the main character. I don't think that Dementis is the main character at all,
No.
but I think that his kind of co-lead, co-story with Furiosa to their big standoff in the desert, and then the whole thing with the tree and the seed. The seed
Yeah.
is where she came from and what she's going to do with her life, and how those two things are so intertwined with Dementis.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. Like,
No.
yeah.
That was no. I don't think any of us could have expected
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
How did you feel about that tree thing?
It's a choice, it's a very interesting choice. This idea of instead of just killing, instead of just destroying, using him as forcing him to become some sort of soil
Mm-hmm.
for something that to grow that is. Yeah, there's something sort of strangely optimistic about it, like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that this is life, that she's sort of harnessed his chaos and used him for something against his will. And of course, I hate to, at the risk of, I don't know how George Miller would feel about this, but I mean, one has to bring up the fact that George Miller is Greek. He's an Australian, but he's of Greek descent. His parents were immigrants, and his co-writer Nico Lathouris is also of Greek descent. And I always think with George Miller that feels somehow almost sort of destined, that this man of Greek descent who comes from this culture that has literally defined mythology for the whole world, and he has almost everything he's done has been basically sort of in that kind of level of storytelling of the mythological and the fabulistic, and like even
Mm-hmm.
3,000 Years of Longing. I mean, very few. I mean, look at his filmography, and there's just like nothing. There's nothing like it. I mean, it's like children's movies and Mad Max movies, and you'll get a couple weird things like The Witches of Eastwick, which he probably, if he had to go do it over again, he probably wouldn't do. But yeah, it's such a singular something like Lorenzo's Oil, which is like that's sort of the most of its kind. It doesn't fit in almost with anything else,
Mm.
but it also does feel almost the suffering in that film. If you haven't seen Lorenzo's Oil, I only saw Lorenzo's Oil a couple of years ago. It is it's a masterpiece, and it's brutal in terms of this couple watching this disease tear their kid apart. It's such an extreme situation, which is based on a true story, but it almost feels like a fable, like mythology itself. Like
Right.
the gods have somehow cursed this family,
Right.
and how do they deal with it? Even though it's not, it's the everyday. It's in some ways, I suppose, possibly his most everyday thing he's ever made. Something set that's in our world, but the situation's so extreme. So yeah, so Dementis's end. I almost lost my where was I? Dementis's end is almost, yeah. It's like you can't help but think, okay, yes, this is the son of Greece who is
Right.
who's comes up with a a fate for such a character. Someone who's that dynamic and always moving to be like immobile and chained to
Yeah.
something, to one spot, and he's just the opposite of what he is, what he was. And yet there's like this almost hint of a smile on his face, what's left of him at the end, as if he's even he's got to respect what
Yeah.
how the kind of revenge she's taken on him by knowing in some ways he deserves it. And at the risk of alienating um, viewers or listeners right now who are don't share my politics, I also have to think. It also made me think about Trump, obviously, because we're always going to come. He's always going to come up when we talk about sort of extreme characters who are sort of chaotic evil. That's for the rest of our lives. It's going to be. But what was interesting is that Fury Road. I think part of the mystique of Fury Road is the way that it almost seemed to predict the rise of Donald Trump. In some ways, the people have made the comparisons often to Immortan Joe and Trump, but it's almost like Immortan Joe is who Trump would like to be, and I think Dementis is a lot closer to who he is. And I feel like almost I wonder if Miller, that was in any way. I mean, that would be my Q&A question, I guess. Is like, was witnessing what his presidency was like, did that have anything to do with this new character? Because it just, again, chaotic evil, just like in his purest form, like that he gets these things. He just, all he is he's just an id. He's got Gas Town, but he wants Bullet Town and the Citadel. He can't, and he's running them into the ground. He's not. He can't really control these things. Like that. Just to me seemed like a very. I mean, it felt very familiar to me.
Right. Almost like a reaction to, okay, here is this, dramatic over the top character in Immortan Joe, and then, oh, actually, now that we've all lived through this, here's what that guy actually is, and he's a clown,
right?
And he's incapable. And throughout the film, we see as incapable when he first shows up to the Citadel.
Yeah. It's hysterical.
And,
no, that's such a brilliant scene because, we know. It's like, to me, and there's a bigger point here about prequel storytelling that I want to just say, like, we've seen so many bad prequels, so many that it's, every day you turn on, you hear the Hollywood Reporter on YouTube. There's a story about another unnecessary prequel that a streamer is going to do, right? And prequels have been run through the mud. You just the idea of them, and then you get a good one. You get a Better Call Saul, and you go,
Sure.
That's what it can do. When it's good. And for me, a great prequel moment is when Dementis rolls into the Citadel as if he's going to just knock over Immortan Joe like everyone else, and we know that he doesn't know. We know no, this is not going to go that way. This is I'm not to say you could never take Joe, but Joe is unlike anything you faced before, and this is not his followers and the demonstration with the war boy. Right, that's such great. Again, what prequels can do, like using the audience's knowledge in a way so that we are ahead of some of the characters, because we already know that he will never take the Citadel. That's just not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. I'm waiting. I know it's coming, but I'm waiting for the Citizen Kane prequel film that's just about a little boy and his sled.
Right. It's a mania. It's like, I mean, what was the one, like Legally Blonde? Like, do we really need the early days of Elle? Like, does anyone need that? Like, like the whole point of these stories is like, this is where their story begins. Like, every backstory doesn't need to be told.
It's a shame because that a lot of those are coming from one of two starting points, which is a production company saying, okay, what IP do we have that we can turn into something already so we don't have to buy something?
Right.
Or someone is approached with a great script and a great story, and they say, how can we turn this into an already existing IP? So the Legally Blonde TV show, I think it's going to be, I can't remember, about her younger years. Maybe someone wrote a fabulous new original idea. They brought it to people, got turned down by 15 different people. And the 16th one said, yeah, we'll do it if we can turn it into an Elwood's origin story. And
Right.
they said yes because they want to sell their thing and see it made. And
Right.
it's crazy. But I try to reserve my judgment now until I see the thing because I've
Yeah.
been proven wrong. When you brought up a great example when Better Call Saul was announced. I mean, who didn't love Saul Goodman, in Breaking Bad, but it was like, really? Like
Yeah. That
why
shouldn't
do
have
I
worked.
care what he was up
Right.
to?
Right. That should
And then
not
you
have
watch
worked.
it and you're like, oh my
Right.
God. Like, yes, this was actually a really great idea. And then
Arguably
also,
better than Breaking Bad,
yeah, I haven't finished it, so I can't
Okay.
definitively say that. But a lot of people say that. And from
Yeah.
what I have seen, I'm like, sure, it
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely could be. For every proposed idea of, the Frog Brothers from Lost Boys prequel series, you do get Furiosa and you do get Better Call Saul. And I just say, I'll see it. And if I don't see it, then I don't have an opinion on it anyway. So,
Right.
but I do think that Furiosa fits well within the 5 films. It's well acted. I feel it didn't betray the strong characters and mythology that was already set up in Fury Road. Like at no point was I like, you really
Right.
are sabotaging yourself here. It was like, no, this all fits. It all fits. And the wildness of Dementis and Furiosa fixing that for a Morton Joe and the other warlords, it makes sense why Furiosa is so revered, and it makes sense why she has such a high level of trust with everyone. And it also explains why someone who, when you watch Fury Road, it's like, how can you work so closely with a Morton Joe and you've worked your way up and you've done all these terrible things for him, and then you just decide to betray him, right? And we know that
Hmm.
there was a long plan and a long story. And so I feel like Furiosa just cements the why, the how, all of that stuff is possible.
Right. Yeah. And again, I mean, Miller is great at not, he doesn't do exactly what you expect. He doesn't take this prequel and he doesn't do too many. I know some people, there are a couple of Easter eggs that I think some people maybe would have liked not to have. Someone was complaining about the very, like, soft footprint cameo of Max, or who we presume is
Mm-hmm.
Max. And it's like, but come on, is that really something that that takes that's all of 5 seconds, and it's not a
Oh,
big
it's
part of the
yeah,
film. So
it's a take it or leave it moment. If it
right,
wasn't
exactly,
there, okay. It's
right,
there, okay. Who cares?
right. But it is interesting that we don't get a lot of time with her looking at Joe sideways, and where we're going, oh, I'm gonna betray you one day. Like, we
Yeah.
don't. He doesn't bother with that.
Nope.
We know who she is, and we know how she feels about men like him, and
Mm-hmm.
so we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. That's what's, I think, interesting about Furiosa, is that this is the first time we've ever, in the Mad Max saga, this is the first time we've ever had a a long time span sort of epic, where we are staying with a character over a period of decades. Like, we've never,
Mm-hmm.
Max is, yes, you could argue that we've done that with Max, but we do that in different stories. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Max is our thread to the before, to the pre-apocalyptic times. And yeah, for those who haven't seen the original Mad Max, it's, I mean, it's easy with a series like this for Mad Max to sort of be neglected, because it's the one, it is the only truly low budget film in the group, and it is just sort of like, exploitation. But yeah, it's also, yeah, it's a pretty remarkable piece of filmmaking by pretty much an amateur filmmaker. I mean, George Miller's
Mm-hmm.
a emergency room doctor. When he's making
Yes.
that film, he's making that on the weekends, which is
Yeah.
unbelievable. And the stunts are amazing. And you would think this
Yep.
guy had been working directing for years. It's a remarkable debut, and it's the only time we see the sort of crumbling before. But yeah, Furiosa, we're spending decades with this character and watching her grow, and we've never done that before. And some people have compared it to Charles Dickens, or but yeah, it is a much more like a novel than anything we've had. There's even
Mm-hmm.
chapter breaks. Um, And you know what? Great. I mean, I think we got to like let people, try new things, take things in a different direction. I mean, he's done it before. He's done a lot with this world. Um, and he's 79 years old. He's got different things to say than he did, 35, 40 years ago. I also want to say about Thunderdome, I don't think I knew this until I feel like they didn't really tell us for a long time that like George Miller only really co-directed Beyond Thunderdome. Like
Hmm.
he because of the death of Byron Kennedy, who's still on his name. It says at the beginning, Kennedy Miller Mitchell. So the producer that replaced Byron Kennedy is sort of now part of that. It's like it's a triumvirate now, but like it was originally Kennedy Miller. That was George Miller's partner, died tragically in this sort of prep, I believe, in connection to Thunderdome. And George Miller was so affected by it that he sort of turned over the directing to someone else.
Hmm.
So, if Thunderdome doesn't quite feel right, or if if it feels off, that's why. It was definitely it's a little more mainstream. I think it's the most PG. It's the only maybe PG-13 film in the group, and yeah, it was definitely. It was not. It's not perhaps a pure vision, although Miller has had a little bit of that sort of like directing from the producer's chair. He's done a little bit of that. I mean, certainly Babe, is not technically
Sure.
Miller, but I mean, it is him, but it isn't. And I know it kind of bothers him that his name's not on it, but he chose not to direct it. So yeah. Anyhow, just wanted to. So I think one has to. I think Beyond Thunderdome is his weakest film aside from Happy Feet Part Two. That's the only George Miller film I think that's just not good. But that one was definitely a low point for the saga, but again, with reason.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, and I personally don't miss Max at all. Like um, it's not something that I was at all missing in this film or his presence. I think Furiosa is a completely engaging Miller badass, and Tom Burke as Torian Jack was pretty
Mm-hmm.
great. The guy that last saw as a junkie in The Souvenir, junkie aesthete. So great to see him do something totally different. But yeah, just it is very interesting to Miller being someone who doesn't want to just keep repeating himself, but also realizing. I mean, women in George Miller films. That's a really interesting conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, for someone who makes the kind of films he does, he's never been someone who's like it's a boys club and it's just about the
Right.
bros being bros. And so yeah, it is fascinating that he's been working. That gender has always driven his films in many ways, which is a V-Swick for all of its flaws is another great example of that. And now it's like in many ways Furiosa is the ultimate example, what he was always working towards.
Right. My thing with Thunderdome is these movies feel incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Like you watch Mad Max, and like you said, it's pretty much just an exploitation film. But you're watching, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my god, did I just watch someone die? And
Right,
then you
right,
watch The Road Warrior, and you're like, I think I did just watch someone
right.
die.
Yeah.
And then same thing, same feeling with Fury Road. It's like you can't. Oh my god. But with
And no
Thunderdome,
major catastrophes on Fury Road. Like no one got
right,
really serious. Some people got a little banged up, but no one got seriously hurt. It's
yeah,
amazing.
it's
Yeah,
it's it's amazing.
that's
And to
stunt
be a
on.
doctor
Yeah,
and
yeah,
put people
exactly.
through those things is,
Right.
it's a major trust in his confidence and ability.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, phew. But
Yeah.
yeah, Thunderdome, obviously there's a lack of a lot of the car stuff. But to what you were saying about not missing Max, one thing about, you know, Road Warrior through Furiosa is it's littered with incredibly interesting characters who are not Max. Max is always kind of witnessing and experiencing the world of the wasteland, and it's
Mm-hmm.
how he's
Mm-hmm.
helping or interacting everyone else around him. And it's such a great aspect of this series is when Max isn't on the screen. You know, it's like that Simpsons joke. When Max isn't on the screen, all the other characters should be asking, "Where's Max?" No
Mm-hmm.
one's ever asking that.
Right.
We're asking, "Oh, where's the gyrocopter pilot?"
Right. Right.
Like, "Oh, where's Furiosa? Oh, where's that war boy who's interesting?" You know, there's a lot of characters that we're really interested in besides the title character, and
Mm-hmm.
to do that is also, like I said, it's great writing. Like, to have us care as much or more about the co-leads and the villains and all those things. You know, not so much the first one, I feel like, but I feel like you have to kind of just take each film in this series as its own entry, you know?
Yeah.
Some people like to talk about the continuity of this. It's like the least interesting conversation about this that I want to have. I don't care. I don't care
Right.
if Max is younger in Fury Road.
Right.
I just it's Mad Max, and like you said, it's kind of a mythology. And I did hear an interesting point about the tree, right? You know, is this whole thing being told by a history man, and are these things real events, or is it the legend and the mythology about Furiosa and about Max?
Mm-hmm.
And is that why there aren't hard and fast rules about how this all works? You know, how
Mm-hmm.
do you have an army of 200 motorcycles when no one has any resources? Like,
Right.
I just don't really care, you know.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I thought I did kind of have that amazing shot of the armada going around
Mm-hmm.
that giant, butte or formation, whatever you call it. And yeah, you do have that moment like it's a lot of motorcycles for the post-apocalypse, a lot of gas, and one of those guys isn't on E right now. Like, yeah,
Right.
you do, but
Right.
it's like right at a certain point, you know, you just like this that sort of cinema sensing is like
Oh
the
God, I
death
hate
of
that.
like yeah
Yeah.
yeah yeah yeah
I
my
hate all of that.
my
Like I
kid
said, there's fun facts and there are fun thought
right
experiments, but
right
I think CinemaSins, fan theories, headcanon, I think it's
yeah
called, all of that stuff, we need to move away from the
yes
dissecting, and we need to get closer to the experience of art and the experience of the film, and not just checking boxes and making lists. And I
right
love making lists and I love
right
learning facts, but man, I also love watching 200 motorcycles
yes
drive through the desert, and you know, Dementis with a 3 bike chariot, you
yes
know, as if this is ancient Rome.
right
I don't, you know, just show me cool stuff.
yeah it's like there has to be there's a certain realism that it gets realism is tyrannical and it gets really boring and
Mm-hmm.
it just then you're not really I just find that kind of cinema sins thing to be just so boring and the opposite of what all this is supposed to be about
Mm-hmm.
and the opposite of what makes film worth getting excited about where you're a year out you're like I can't wait to see this. It's like so much of fandom seems to be at odds with what this whole thing is about and sort of killing almost wanting to destroy it. And yeah, I mean we all have our fun little fan theories and head canon, but yeah, at a certain point you're just like yes, enough. Like
Yeah.
or this is or create your own thing, which is
Absolutely.
hard to do, which is a lot easier to hijack something else and turn it into what you want it to be rather than engaging what's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, anyhow I'm not saying, again, certainly not every George Miller film is just I don't mean to it's hard not to put him on a pedestal, but I believe in engaging critically with what you're seeing and sitting with it and things like that. But yeah, you also have to really just be impressed
Sure.
with what it is and
We can hold
having
two things at the
yeah,
same
exactly.
time. We can say George Miller has made some not great stuff, but also what a career, what choices, and What more do you want? Sure, he
Yeah,
doesn't have a JFK. He doesn't have a Malcolm X. He doesn't have a Citizen Kane. Who cares? Not everyone
yeah,
has to.
absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. I do want to really recommend everyone, if you haven't gone, I'm pulling up the title just so I don't want to get it wrong. 40,000 Years of Dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
His short, it's 67 minutes, which I think is sort of a feature depending on who you ask.
Right.
Documentary about Australian cinema, which is on YouTube. I highly recommend everyone watch it. I mean, Miller is one of those people like Martin Scorsese. I could literally spend, days listening to them talk about movies
Mm-hmm.
because they're just so not just knowledgeable, but there's just a sort of a beautiful spirit behind the way they approach film and what they value in film. And with Miller being Australian, I think, you know, we, at the risk of infuriating people who use woke as a pejorative, I mean, this guy has always been pretty progressive and
Mm-hmm.
understood. I mean, that's what I'm fascinated by with Australian cinema is how, the white Australians cope with all that history and what the meaning of it. Peter Weir is another one that I
Sure.
really admire. And yeah, how do they reconcile, the history, the oppression of the indigenous population, and yeah, it's without being very like on the nose necessarily about it. I mean, it's a big part of George Miller and his sort of worldview is to keep the black fellas, as they call them down there, in his head, and
Mm.
understand that yes, this is their country that we are sort of are occupying. His Letterboxd 4 was also, he just on Letterboxd just posted his top 4 films, and again,
Right. Yeah, I
it's
saw. Yeah.
just amazing, like the way that he handled that, and how he sort of tried to encompass Australia in all of its complexities without leaving out, the Aboriginal people.
That documentary, I haven't seen it yet. You said it's on YouTube?
Yes, you can get it on YouTube. Yeah, 40,000 Years of Dreaming, and there's a subtitle, as if to say the 40,000 Years of Dreaming is by the black fellas, and the white fellas have came to Australia much shorter period of time and did their dreaming there too. But yeah, it's
Mm.
really no, it'll definitely change how you sort of think about Miller to hear him, and it's just him on camera, just like with Martin Scorsese's personal, journey through American cinema, where the director is literally on camera talking to you about what they believe their national cinema is and what makes it unique. And yeah, I love it. It's like I think I'm going to start sort of putting that on the syllabus for my just film 101, because I feel like even if it's not about Australian cinema, it's just anybody who's studying film should really see it because of that,
Right.
because it's the way he thinks about film is so sort of poetic and profound. Um,
Yeah, and at 67 minutes, and if it's on YouTube, it's kind of a no-brainer there. It
yeah,
only
yeah,
has
yeah,
320 logs on Letterboxd.
yeah,
So, be the first of your friends. Be the first
yeah,
kid on your street to
right,
watch 40,000 Years of Dreaming.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm
I
gonna
know
check it
it's
out. I might check it out tonight, actually.
please, yeah. So, and let me know what you think. But the other part about Furiosa is, of course, the action, and how amazingly handled the chase scenes are. And I think he does know that while he doesn't have to, it's impossible to outdo Furiosa. And I did air quotes with outdo, or to top it. Like, you kind of have to show us something we haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the polecats in the last film, which it was pretty remarkable and amazing. And this one we've got sort of guys on gliders, and that's
Yeah.
pretty great. And the Bomby Knocker, I believe it is.
Yeah.
And I know there's been some complaining about CGI, the increased use of CGI. And first of all, almost, I think, most of the shots in Fury Road had some CGI. It's not like my problem with CGI becoming the sort of like bête noir of film is that while I understand that it has been abused, it's a tool like anything else, and it can be used well or it can be not used well.
Sure.
And it has been used in lots of things, that people don't realize the CGI, and yet and so they don't. So but yeah, they only see it when it's bad, and therefore
Right.
decide that it is bad. Um, yeah, listen, when you read how the book on how this film was, how Fury Road was made, it's my thing is like, how do you expect him to do that again? He's 79 years old.
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
if
Yeah.
he tried to make Fury Road exactly how he made Furiosa, we would be waiting another 10, 15 years for Furiosa. And I personally, and also, I mean, the man is 79 years old. Maybe he just doesn't want to go to Namibia for 2, 3 years. I don't blame him, So he did it once. And
Yeah.
if he is using CG more and not, he's making a film that took a fraction of the time to make Fury Road. And sure, I suppose you can tell, even though he's building on so much of what he did. I mean, most of the team is back. I also want to say, not the cinematographer. John Seal shot Fury Road. John Seals also is a little bit older than George Miller, so
Hmm.
perhaps John Seal. I don't know. Maybe he was busy, or maybe he was like, "Yeah, once was enough for me at my age." Because I mean, he basically almost came out of retirement to shoot Fury Road, which is amazing
Right.
given what Fury Road is. Margaret Sixel is back, George Miller's wife, to edit, but she's also got a co-editor this time. She's not the sole editor. Jenny Bevan is back as the costume designer, and on Mad Max movies, that the costume designer deserves to be right up there with the
Yeah.
cinematographer and editor
Absolutely.
because it's such a big job. And of course, she won the Oscar for Fury Road and stunned the world by showing up in a embroidered leather jacket and basically jeans. And if you go to the Academy Museum here in Los Angeles, that outfit that she wore at the Academy that sort of shocked everyone to see this older woman dressed that way at the Oscars and not in a gown. They have that outfit on display in the
Wow.
Academy Museum, which is always fun to see. I'm a member, I go quite often. So, yeah, so they're all back. So, yeah, in some ways, I feel like it was almost like they just took a hiatus from after Fury Road to make 3,000 Years of Longing, and now they're sort of back. So on the one hand, sure, probably didn't need to take as long to make, but also like, yeah, I don't blame him for maybe using CG on some things that he didn't do before. And God, I mean, at some point, I mean, I just want people to get over get over things. And like, I mean, yeah, it's not the first film, and or not the last. It's not Fury Road, but it's for what Furiosa is. Yeah, I mean, it didn't detract. It didn't feel.
No.
It didn't feel like the whole thing was taking place on some sound stage, at
Right.
all. So, I just think now this has become a knee jerk response and a knee jerk sort of like critique. They critique without really much thought behind it.
Yes. And unfortunately, the way that we consume films before they even come out is another
Yes,
thing. Every day, it's like, oh, new look at so and so as the Crow. And it's like,
right,
well, that ain't the movie. I'm
right,
sorry. A picture, a makeup test,
right.
a still, it just ain't the movie. I'm not watching it in motion. I'm not watching it in context. I'm not
Right.
watching it.
And we all fall prey to it. We all
Yeah,
get sucked into the like, let's analyze this thing as
yeah,
it's being worked on. We do, and it's wrong.
yeah,
But yeah, it's like, dude, you don't know anything until you sit in the theater. You just
yeah, yeah,
until you're
yeah.
in the theater and the lights go down, you don't know shit. You don't
Right.
really know what you're getting. So it's
Yeah.
really silly, but we do it, and it's like we're almost the system. The way it's set up is almost training us to do that, to
Oh, yeah, yeah,
pre-consume
yeah.
everything.
To keep, yeah, you want to keep people thinking about Furiosa every day
Mm-hmm.
between when it's announced and when it's dropped, and it's
Right.
people's jobs. People are paid to like just slowly drip little bits of information, and then the people who it costs us nothing to comment, right? And
Right.
so if something costs you nothing, it's incredibly cheap. And so, like you said, it's like a knee-jerk reaction when you see stills from Furiosa to compare it to one of the greatest action films ever made and just declare it bad before you even watch it. But like you said, when you're actually there watching it, did some stuff look a little CGI? Sure. But did it take away from my experience of seeing it? No, not at all. And I think also to your point, CGI being a tool, we all got a great taste of that last year when Godzilla Minus One came out, which was made for less than $15 million. And I think everyone had this realization like, oh, CGI isn't bad. People using it who have no sense of style, they are bad.
Yep.
Because you have amazing artists behind that film that are making an up close and personal Godzilla, and it's like, oh, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And yeah, so it all depends on how you use it. I think that George Miller and the team here, I think they used it appropriately, and I agree with everything that you're saying about sometimes people are older. Sometimes you don't know why people make decisions. Maybe George Miller wanted to go back to Namibia. Maybe someone close to him was sick and he decided to spend more time at home instead. Maybe he felt like, hey, we did this thing that took 30 years and I don't want to do that again. Who
Right.
knows? But the point is, they're the ones making it. And if you feel that strongly, go make something yourself. I just spent a day filming yesterday as a bit part of something, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. What did we get? 4 minutes of footage? You know what I mean? Like when you put time into realizing like how much work something is, I think you're a little, I don't want to say easier on it, but you're maybe perhaps not so quick to just say garbage or
Right.
trash or,
And I don't want to at all fall into the like, you think it's hard unless you've made a movie you can't criticize. I don't want to at all fall into that.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, right, it doesn't matter how hard it is. It's like if it's not good, it's not good. But yeah, I do feel that a certain amount can sometimes be a lack of understanding about how demanding and grueling it is. I mean, I've done a couple of features and I've shot a couple for whatever foolish reason. My both of my features have some scene in the desert or in some sort of chaparral. The little taste I've gotten of that kind of shooting, I cannot fathom like having a career of westerns or doing what George Miller's doing. Like I just can't. Like it is hard. It's hard to be. I've stood in Death Valley in August like a madman shooting just for a couple of hours, and that like takes a lot out of you. And like, I don't know that film lovers really understand how much every film takes out of a filmmaker, and there are people that make it look easy and effortless, but like you lose something every time you make something like this. And I can completely understand that Miller wants to maybe not have that experience be quite the same, but also feel like he has something more to say and to add to this world that he has created. So yeah, I just think people need to be a little bit more, instead of just being, and I'll just feel so bratty and demanding and like, give me what I want and go out there, George Miller, and do it the way that I demand. It's like, dude, just, please.
Which he has never done. He's
Right.
never, if you're looking for sameness from him, if you're looking for safety, if you're looking for bankability, you are not going to find it from George Miller, who, yes, was working additional shifts at emergency rooms in order to fund his film, was paying crew in beer to fund his film. Well, like you're barking up the wrong tree.
Yes, you are.
Did you have anything else that we didn't mention that you want to talk about?
Not really. I feel like, we didn't cover, I think we said what what needs to be said. I mean, I only just saw the film, and you've talked to me a year from now, I may have new things to say, but for right now, as having recently experienced it, I want to avoid hyperbole. I don't want to say, it's the greatest thing ever made, or it's the greatest. I don't even think it's the best George Miller film. I do think Fury Road is his best film, followed by Lorenzo's Oil, then Road Warrior, and then I would put Furiosa fourth. But but it's a remarkable achievement that I think we are incredibly lucky to have had. I mean, if he never went back to the wasteland after Fury Road, that would have been highly understandable, and we would have been lucky to have just those four films. But to get one more and
Sure.
a new take on it, again, we're it is these days. This year is pretty terrible. Like there's not much to look forward to this year. There's not a lot of films coming down the pipeline that I'm excited about, and I'm just grateful that someone is making big spectacle that is also personal and idiosyncratic. I mean, there's not much of that left, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, but I agree. So, Brandon, where can people find you online?
Well, if you want to hear me spout off about everything, there's Twitter, which again I won't call it X. I am under the sobriquet Genius Bastard, one word, Genius Bastard. It's an old film school joke about a canceled filmmaker. But so I'm on a lot of things under that. So for Twitter is a good place. I talk a lot about films there. Also, Letterboxd. I'm also a big user of Letterboxd and a compulsive list maker. You can look at my entire George Miller ranked list, and
Nice.
I don't know, I have like 40 lists probably, either years or or careers that of people whose work I've seen uh, all or almost all of everything. So yeah, so those are my places. I occasionally write um, for RogerEbert.com. If you search my name, Brandon Wilson, there you'll get a few pieces for Roger Ebert about reviews, features, obits, and a couple on the playlist as well.
Awesome. We'll definitely give Brandon a follow. Check out his work everywhere that you can find it. He's a super cool dude, as you've spent the last hour and 15 minutes ish finding out. Thank you very much for listening. We'd love it if you'd send us an email, moviefriendspodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought about Furiosa. Let us know what you think about George Miller. Box office stuff, not super interested in that. But did your stomach get butterflies when you saw someone jump off an oil rig? Let us know. You can also give us a rating wherever you're listening. You don't have to, but you know what? Throughout the day, you click so many things that you don't even remember. And you know what it contributes towards? Nothing. Maybe a billionaire making an extra half a penny. But you know what? Today, right now, you can contribute to something else that won't matter to anyone except for one person. And that is me. By giving us a rating and a review wherever you're listening. We'd really appreciate it. You can also support the show, patreon.com/moviefriendspodcast. $5 a month gives you access to all of our additional content, our Patreon-only Discord, and you get to vote on upcoming episodes and monthly themes. It's fun. It's a good time. And you know what? The way that the world's going, you could either buy a single banana for $5 or you could support this show. And you know what? You don't need all of the potassium. You're doing fine. Brandon, thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate it, especially coming out. Listener Brandon joined me at 8 a.m. his time on Memorial Day. So he's a trooper, and I really appreciate it.
Seth, thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure.
And thank you very much for listening. Have a good one.
Movie Friends is produced by Seth Vargas and Michelle Rubenstein. Music by Anthony Vicora. If you like the show, please subscribe and give us a rating. It really helps us find new friends. Thanks!